What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to talk about SPY in relation to NIO, break down some very important technicals on it, and talk about why this could actually help NIO to some extent. This may actually help NIO bounce once you see the technicals on it. I'm going to break down some very important things to watch for. But before I do anything like this, let me just mention a couple of things. I'm firstly not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon, in just about 4 days, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. So looking at NIO, like we mentioned before, NIO has this falling wedge that's been developing, but SPY has the same thing as well. But I want to break down why on earth the market has a tendency of moving on a very similar algorithm. And this algorithm could lead to very big ripple effects from the big ETFs that end up impacting many other stocks out there. Because if you look at SPY and how it moves, it's very similar to the QQQ typically. At least in this market, we've been seeing lots of similar price action. And with that happening, the real question that appears is if the market's going to bounce, if the market is about to see some upside, SPY and QQQ may move in unison. And if they end up doing that, that could lead to some more bullish momentum for NIO. So let's break this down. So you have this comparison right here between NIO and SPY. You will notice that they tend to move very similarly, at least in the very beginning. But then during this period right here, NIO really started to underperform because they had some very weak deliveries for the start of the year during like the April to May period. And that's why NIO was underperforming. But then look at how they started pumping together. You have SPY pushing, we also have NIO pushing like that. And you could do the same thing with the NASDAQ, the triple Q, and the list goes on. They came down together, NIO pushed a little bit more. Then they continued to drop together, they pumped together, came down together, they pumped together. And then NIO started underperforming because of the bad deliveries that were coming out. Then finally, if you look at the QQQ was pumping, NIO was also following for the last few months, right? It just goes to show NIO does have a tendency of being impacted by these big ETFs, these big other funds. And I believe there's a good chance that if we get some kind of bounce, as soon as next week, it could have a big effect on NIO. So what's going on with next week? Just to look at the data, I'm not really seeing anything. We have some Fed speakers. We have some housing data coming out, initial jobless claims for Thursday, and then not really too much coming out for next week in particular, but I think it gets crazier the week after as we're going to have like more data. But for now, just to be clear, there's not a whole lot going on until we have Jackson Hole for the 25th. So next week's not going to be that heavy for the data, but we do have some big earnings coming out. As far as earnings go, we have like the Home Depot and just a couple of others. We have lots of retail like Target and Walmart. So, there's not going to be too much heavy data impacting the markets, which does give it some leeway. But then to add on to this, when you look at SPY from a technical standpoint, we are approaching some major support because when you draw out this trend line right here, right, this is where SPY almost bounced today, this trend line right here, the yellow one. Let me just change the color. That way it's easy for me to distinguish the different trend lines. We're going to make this blue instead. I would say blue would be better. So the blue trend line right here is where SPY got this bounce because this was the historical support. And then when you look back, we have this breakout right here, right? We have this breakout level. We were basically trading sideways at this level at one point. We got lots of rejections at this resistance. And then this is the breakout area. This is like 444 area. That's why it's a very special support now. This was resistance and we got a breakout, right? The market broke out, started pushing. And then the question is, what's going to happen when we test this? Because first off, we're approaching, once again, this previous resistance, the breakout zone, right? We're approaching the breakout zone right here. So now we're approaching this area right here on the chart. This is going to act as a support. And then on top of this, we have this blue trend line acting as support as well. We're approaching some strong support that could help the market trade a little sideways and possibly even try to break out of the wedge and start pushing to the opposite direction. There is a possibility of that happening, but we have to wait and see if there's any like confirmed breakout from the wedge for the time being. So we have to watch it to see if that's going to happen. Right now we have this resistance right here. We haven't really broken above our 447 resistance and etc. And if we were to sink more, right, if we do break below 444 and we fail to hold the low we made on Friday, then I could see us hitting like 442 before the bounce comes. Those are like the two possibilities I'm looking at on SPY. So it's just like what I said about NIO yesterday. The potential drop, we could drop a little more than bounce, or we might see us just straight up bounce as soon as Monday. It's a little hard to predict at this point. It really depends on how we react to these trend lines. But one thing that's worth noting is the daily chart on SPY. If you go to the daily chart, even though the technicals are looking weak, on the 50 EMA, it happens to be around this 441.3 area. It's very close to where this gap is, right? This unfilled gap around 442. So I'm anticipating it might come down to 442, then bounce, or it might not fill the gap. It might just like hold support and then just bounce from here. It's got to be one of those two most likely. Either drops a little bit more than bounces or it just bounces from here. I think those are the two most probable possibilities based off the technicals over here, right? Because once again, we're approaching this very important support. They could drop it a little bit more, then get it right back up above. Really depends on news and all those other factors, but we approach this area. And once we fill the gap, I think the market should try to bounce, and then we're going to be watching how it reacts to these other supports. Now, from a technical standpoint, we could do this. We could look at the market like from this extent. We could look at the trend line like this. I could redraw this a little bit, which means that there could be a little bit more downside coming, just a little bit more before there's any sort of like bounce. You could redraw it like this. I mean, yeah, you could make some adjustments, but the bottom line is we're still forming this falling wedge, and eventually there will be a breakout most likely. We'll just have to see if we could find where it breaks out from. I'm leaning towards this thing either bouncing from here, and to get a confirmation of a bounce, we have to break out of this resistance, break above 447, or we drop one more time, another little drop to about 442, and then we get a really nice breakout, and we see SPY pushing back to like 450 or so. That could be a real possibility. So with that said, right, that's the effect SPY is going to likely have. On the QQQ, you could do the same thing. I don't think I've really charted this as much because I don't really trade the QQQ that often. But if anything, what we can mention is that the QQQ had this wedge. I actually have it drawn out. That's pretty funny. But here's the thing. I want to readjust this. I think it's going to look more like this. So with this, wedge that's been developing on the triple Q, I just wanted to say that we could redraw it in two different ways. We could draw this trend line, or we could just draw out one from like right this end, right about here. So there are two different ways to draw this out, but either way, it's like a double falling wedge, regardless of how you want to look at it. And I just want to change these colors up just a little bit so it's easier to track. But for now, this is what it's looking like on the triple Q, right? So we have this falling wedge that's also developing, and we're approaching this level right about here. So we ended up breaking below the breakout area, but we're approaching this support right about here. We have a lot of touches in this like 365 area, 364 area. We actually touched that, so that's going to be a really nice support. We're going to be watching if this 364 to 365 area holds. We're approaching it very nicely, so there's a good chance of that happening. Let me just draw out an extended, not an extended line, a horizontal line. I think that would be a lot better. So like right about here, so we're going to be watching this trend line right here, which could be an area where this thing may see some support or an attempt to bounce. There is one possibility of that. We'll have to see how that reacts. If it breaks a little lower, I mean, I could technically see it drop down a little bit lower to where the gap was. Let me just double check where the gap was on the triple Q uh, before we get any kind of bounce. I think we filled the gap already down here. There's also the support right here around this like 357 area. It's about 360. We could drop a little bit more. I'm not counting on it to drop that low. I'm going to be saying like around 363 could be where this thing tries to bounce, if not a little bit lower. I would say very close to 360 is where this thing could bottom. Very, very close to that before this thing gets a bounce, or it could just bounce from here off our daily 50 EMA because it is holding support so far. So it's got to be one of those two. It either bounces here or it drops a little bit more before the bounce actually comes off like 360 or so. It's got to be one of those two, right? I'm leaning more in that direction. Now, there's no confirmation of the breakout yet, right? So we want to see this thing actually break out. We want to see the Nasdaq, the triple Q. We want to see them break out first before we actually turn bullish, right? So we have to wait for the charts to tell us. We're going to be patient in the process, but I just want to tell you that there's a good probability that as soon as next week this could happen, and I think SPY is like a better indicator of this. It's more indicative of that because we're approaching this confluence of so many supports, right? We have like three different supports we're approaching simultaneously. There's this support right here from the falling wedge, the previous breakout level, which is going to act as support. So right about here, this rectangle right here, and this blue line right here, it's another support. The odds favor this thing either coming down a little bit and then trying to bounce, or it just comes down to like 342 or so and then bounces around there, or it just bounces like straight up from here. So it seems very probable that one of those three is going to play out, either dropping a little bit more than bouncing or just bouncing from here. And we will have to wait and see on that. Now, if this does happen, if SPY and QQQ are bouncing, what does that tell us about NIO? Well, there hasn't really been too much negative news for NIO besides a lawsuit, but I don't think that's that huge to the point where NIO has to keep on tanking. I think that there's a chance that NIO will follow the trend as NIO simultaneously has this falling wedge, right? We have a falling wedge on NIO as well. And these are the two possibilities I drew out. It could break out as soon as Monday, or it could drop a little bit lower, drop a little bit more, and then get the breakout. So it's going to be one of those two. I'm leaning more towards as soon as Monday, we might see this thing make an attempt to break out, and then we will see what happens after that, because everything could change depending on news and stuff like that for like the later days. But I'm going to be eyeing something like this. So make sure you guys are watching this wedge. Do not believe these lines I drew out, though. Don't believe it's going to happen like that for sure. I just drew those out as two hypotheticals that are very probable. We have to see confirmation of the break, and as of right now, we're still in the wedge, so we'll just have to wait and see on that. Now, I will talk about more specific levels on NIO and give you guys my prediction for tomorrow specifically. By tomorrow, I mean for Monday specifically, for my video for tomorrow. But for now, I hope this video was as clear as possible and very, very helpful for a lot of people out there. All right, have a great day, everyone. Mark it to the moon as the long term is still incredibly bright, and peace out.